Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see the level of details in which you have approached the impact and next steps part of the work you've been doing, and also the promise you made to report back next year and see what progress have been made. I think this goes back to this impact theme that we've been touching upon. And it's a very promising start. For the feedback and the further perspective, we have Mr. Karel Lannoo, who is the CEO of the European Center of Policy Studies.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Thank you, Mark, for this introduction. And let me first congratulate you, Jean-Luc, and all the others, let's say, for this Forum G20, which I'm here for the first time. I wasn't aware of the forum. I think it's a very useful initiative. My main area of specialization is financial markets, and of course I've been following the G20 since the crisis started about 8 years ago. And I think what is needed at a global level, since we now have this G20 at the global level, which has basically become the global economic governance forum, is additional fora which try to challenge or try to feed into what the G20 is doing at the global level. Of course, we have other networks like the G7 is very well known, but the G7 is in our democratic societies fairly well embedded, because it's, I mean, the different governments which are in there, let's say, are very well challenged by their different parliaments, etc. Also at the European level, US level, in Japan, for example. In the G20, this is not yet sufficiently the case. But if you see how important the G20 agenda setting has become for the world, it is, and I think it should be supported as well, because it's the global governance network. I think networks like these, like what you manage, is extremely important. Also try to feed it into this process. So let me from there comment on what the financial markets or the banking subcommittee has done, which I think is a very useful and a very balanced statement, which was worked out by these people. I participated also in part of my professional career in many of similar initiatives, and I think, let's say, what I've seen in this group was very useful. Let me start probably with some comments on what are banks and financial systems today, and where are we? Move there to regulation, which was one of the points which we have addressed, which is the backward-looking element, towards the forward-looking elements, which are fintech, data privacy, and other forward-looking elements. First of all, look at banks and financial systems today. Where are we? We are still in a phase of adjustment. As I said, 8 years after the financial crisis, we are still absorbing, at the level of financial markets, enormous degrees of financial regulation. I follow this essentially at EU level, but it's not only at EU level, it's still at global level. For example, you may have heard over the last days, there was a G20 meeting in China, the Basel Committee also had its meeting. They're still looking at adapting certain elements of this regulatory framework which we have. One of the things which is on the agenda today, very complex thing, internal ratings-based approach, the way by which banks rate themselves, the way how much capital they need to have, is an issue of contention, for example, between the EU and the United States. How much banks' capital should have. Europe has come up with a clear statement to G20 saying, look, capital levels in banks are sufficient today and should not be significantly increased. And that has been taken up in the G20 statement. And indeed, if you look at the capital levels, for example, in Europe, which I think was probably more hit than the US market overall, they have doubled since 2008. Of course, measured according to Tier 1, which is one of the ratios which we use to look at the health of the banking system. So today we have a capital level, Tier 1, which is about 14.5. Before the crisis it was 8%. So we have double levels of capital. Of course, we still have a debate about the leverage ratio, which is also one of the debates which is ongoing, meaning a non-weighted way to look at the capital levels in the banking sector. But that as well, let's say, is already at much healthier levels than it was before the crisis. So the banking and financial system is in a better shape, but adjustment is still ongoing. Adjustment, for example, you see it today or yesterday, I opened the newspaper, you see further, for example, job cuts, if we speak about employment, ongoing in several European countries. There was also a case again in the US about a form of a fallout, a form of a mis-selling scandal within Wells Fargo. So the banking sector is still under criticism. It also related to the broader societal trends which we see of this, I mean, the tensions between the elites and the non-elites, to some extent, which we see also very strongly in Europe, to some extent, this is still a fallout of the crisis. The crisis has opened, let's say, a formidable misbehavior in the elites in all developed countries, which we still see the reaction in, for example, the support for populist parties, Europe, but also in the United States. So on that issue, we need to know the banking system, financial system is in much better shape. What is important and what is mentioned in the committee, extremely important, banks, financial system should be there to support the real economy. So that's why if you speak about capital level, you speak about prudence. I mean, the system is not safe. No, what should banks do? Financial systems do? They should make sure that the economy can function and that loans can be made to enterprises, to consumers, to spend and to support economic growth. So that is, I think, a very important thing. What we have been doing over the last years is basically pro-cyclical. We should act in financial systems anti-cyclical. If the cycle is weak, economic cycle, we have to make sure that we can stimulate growth. We shouldn't act pro-cyclical, for example, asking for more capital, which will then again damage economic growth. To look forward, let's say, to other issues which were discussed. Important issue now, which is coming, so we see the financial system which is still under attack. What is coming? Fintech, new developments of financial technology. We discuss this also within our center, we discuss it in Europe, we see it at the global level. I would say the financial system today is probably in its core function not in the threat, but the core function which is, in fact, taking deposits and reinvesting them into the economy. Where the financial system may be attacked, it's on the sides. In some elements of its functions, like money transmission, maybe one of the areas where maybe most of the threats, probably storing of money for shorter term, but the longer term function and the ones which are more regulated may remain, the way I see it, core banking functions, of course, to the extent the banks can respond. Yes, related to that is data privacy. Once you speak about fintech, you think about the big US IT companies coming into the financial system. They, of course, control a massive amount of data. Question, however, is, will they use this data for financial purposes? But do they have the expertise also as banks to, for example, do credit scoring, to say, look, we will now use the data to try to sell massive amounts of financial products to our customers? I mean, that could be happening with Apple Pay, with Google Pay, but we don't know it yet. We have heard a lot about this already, but we don't know too much. I think they may be much more interested in the money transmission element, in the short-term element, rather than in the long-term element. There is also issues related to data, issues which we've heard also again over the last weeks and months, is cyber security, data privacy. I mean, we have in Europe, one of the big problems is that we have many different approaches to data privacy. Countries like the UK, which are much more liberal, countries like Germany, which are much more restrictive on that. Extremely difficult to have a common approach to that because of different sensitivities. Another issue is the security of this data. We heard again a few days ago Yahoo, which apparently was hacked for 500 million, 550 million of its clients' data. I mean, can we control this? But cybersecurity is not only an issue of controlling this data, it's also an issue of controlling the money which is flowing through these enormous networks. Do we control this enough? I think that is a big issue for the G20 to address in the future. And then to end with some of these forward-looking elements, which I liked a lot in the group and the Committee on Banking. Important elements for the future, as said by Marcus, financial inclusion, extremely important issue, as we were speaking about these demographic developments of about the different blocks in the society. If we have 1 billion people which are basically access to nothing, if you have no access to a bank account, you basically have no access, certainly in an IT world, no access to any services anymore. If you're living in a cash society, you're in fact very backwards. And I mean, you don't need to go very far. Even in Europe, for example, you have a country like Romania, where 50% of the population doesn't have a bank account. So you can imagine how deprived you are from many of the basic services which we are used to in our society. So that's the other side, to say, look, we are afraid of having our data used by big IT companies, but you have the other side, people we have which are not part of any network whatsoever. Another element, I think, which is a very good idea of this group, is that we need to have some global standards on conduct of good behavior by by banks. We have these global standard setters from prudential standards, but probably we don't have global standard setters for code of good conduct, what can be done and what cannot be done by banks and other financial institutions. I think about the mis-selling scandals, of which I mentioned some others again. So all BI, I think it was a very good, very useful committee, very useful insight, and certainly something which can be fed through to other relevant committees as Marcus suggested. Thank you.